I used to think a quiet life was proof I had done things right. If the mortgage got paid, if the car started, if nobody was shouting in the kitchen, I took that as a kind of victory. At 35, I called that maturity. At 45, I called it gratitude. At 55, I called it wisdom. It took me much longer to admit what it really was. It was fear dressed up as good sense. We lived in a small brick house at the end of a narrow street where every season repeated itself so faithfully it felt rehearsed. In spring, the maple dropped those little helicopter seeds across the driveway. In summer, the air smelled like cut grass and hot concrete. In fall, the gutters filled with brown leaves and the furnace clicked back to life. In winter, the pipes under the kitchen sink groaned when the cold came hard. I could have described that house with my eyes closed, and for years that familiarity comforted me more than any dream ever had. Every evening followed the same path. I came home from the warehouse with dust on my cuffs and ache in my lower back. I unlaced my boots at the door. Ellen stood at the sink rinsing dishes or wiping counters. The local news muttered from the next room. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked at nothing. Relief would move through me the moment I crossed that threshold. Back then, I mistook relief for happiness because relief was easier to recognize. It asked less of me. That is the part no one tells you. Comfort has a gentle voice. It does not slam into your life like disaster. It sits beside you and speaks in reasonable sentences. Stay put. Wait another year. Don't make a mess of a decent thing. Don't risk embarrassment. Don't trade what you know for something uncertain. Comfort never announces itself as surrender. It calls itself responsibility and lets you feel noble while you shrink. The ugly truth is that I had once wanted a larger life. Not fame, not money for the sake of money. I wanted motion. I wanted to build something of my own. I wanted to leave town for a while and see if I became a different man somewhere new. I wanted to know whether I was brave or only lucky enough never to be tested. Those wants were real. I know because they kept resurfacing in odd moments. A roadside billboard for another state. A storefront for lease. A magazine article about a man who started over late and survived it. I remember one rainy evening more clearly than the rest. My supper sat cooling in front of me while water tapped the windows. Ellen asked, almost casually, whether I ever thought we should sell the house and try somewhere else. She did not ask because she hated our life. She asked because she could feel me disappearing inside it. I laughed and said, "For what?" 2 words. That was my answer. For what? I said it like a sensible man protecting what mattered. What I was really protecting was the life I knew how to manage, even if it was making me numb. The first crack in that lie did not feel dramatic. It felt irritating, which is usually how truth enters a man who has been defending himself too long. I was 42, still working at the same supply warehouse on the edge of town, still signing the same invoices under the same buzzing fluorescent lights. We had a loading dock that faced west, and every evening the last light dragged itself across the concrete in long orange stripes. I used to stand there with a clipboard in my hand and watch trucks pull onto the highway. I told myself I was only finishing the shift. The truth was, I was staring at motion. One Friday, a delivery driver came in from Dallas with a load of specialty fixtures. He was close to my age, though he carried himself differently. Not younger exactly. Freer. He had the worn look of a man who had solved his own problems instead of inheriting somebody else's routine. While the crew unloaded his truck, he asked where he could get decent coffee around town. I told him nowhere, and he laughed. Then he said he used to live in a place like this, and could not imagine ever moving back. He did not say it with contempt. He said it with relief. That sentence got under my skin and stayed there all weekend. On Sunday, I sat through church hearing none of the sermon. I kept seeing his face when he said he could not imagine going back. Not because his life sounded glamorous, because it sounded chosen. Hardship sits differently on a man when he believes he walked into it on purpose. My life by then felt inherited from my own caution. That afternoon, I mowed the yard in neat, obedient lines. I trimmed around the mailbox. I swept the driveway after, because that is the kind of maintenance a respectable man does when he wants to prove he is fine. It was a harmless day, a decent day, the kind people call good without thinking too hard. By evening, I had every reason to feel settled. Instead, I felt trapped by my own competence. I had become very good at maintaining a life I did not love. That night, I opened the hall closet to put away a toolbox and found an old envelope shoved behind a stack of board games. Inside were sketches for a repair shop I had once wanted to open. Floor plan, handwritten estimates, a list of services, even a clumsy business name I had once believed sounded professional. I stood there under that dim yellow closet bulb holding papers from a younger version of me who had expected more. What hit me was not inspiration. It was grief, not for money, not for status. Grief for the self that had kept knocking while I kept pretending not to hear him. Comfort had protected me from embarrassment, yes. It had also protected me from becoming anyone I might have respected. That was the beginning of the real split in my mind. I could no longer say my life was good simply because it was orderly. Order had become the hiding place for a quieter kind of loss. Ellen saw the split before I did. Looking back, she had probably been seeing it for years. She was the kind of woman who noticed the emotional weather in a room before most people had even looked out the window. She was not dramatic about it. She did not dig into silence just to feel useful. If anything, she gave me too much room. That was part of our trouble. She mistook patience for kindness, the same way I mistook comfort for happiness. One autumn Saturday, she found me in the garage with those old repair shop sketches spread across the workbench. The place smelled like sawdust, cold metal, and stale gasoline. Leaves scraped across the driveway each time the wind lifted. I had a pencil in one hand and a rag in the other, tracing old figures like I could redraw time itself if I concentrated hard enough. She stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. Then she asked, "Do you still want that?" I should have answered honestly. I should have said, "Yes, I do." And I'm ashamed I let so many years pass without admitting it. I should have said I do not know how to begin now. But I am tired of acting as if caution is the same thing as wisdom. Instead, I shrugged and said, "Doesn't matter now." Ellen walked over, picked up one of the pages, and looked at it longer than I expected. Then she said, "You say that about everything that scares you." There are sentences that divide a life into before and after. Not because they change you instantly, but because once they are spoken, The old lie can no longer pass unnoticed. That sentence struck me like a nail driven straight through the boards I had built around myself. I felt anger first, because anger is often pride stepping in front of pain. I told her she did not understand what it meant to hold a household together. I told her stability mattered more than fantasies. I dressed fear in the uniform of duty and called it moral seriousness. She let me finish. Then she said very quietly, "I know what stability is. I just don't think you're happy." There it was, the word I had been dodging. Happy, not safe, not respectable, not stable. Happy. I hated that word in that moment because it invited measurement I could not fake. Stability is easy to count. Happiness has to be felt in private, and if it is not there, no amount of order can manufacture it. We did what most couples do when truth gets too close. We circled it and retreated. She made soup for dinner. I raked leaves until dark. We talked about groceries and the electric bill and whether the gutters needed cleaning. But something had shifted. I could no longer tell myself my life was good simply because it was calm. Quiet is not the same thing as peace. Order is not the same thing as meaning. And a man can spend decades inside a well-managed unhappiness if nobody forces him to name it honestly. Ellen named it. I just did not yet have the courage to live as if she was right. There was a trip we never took that came to stand for everything wrong in me. Ellen had a cousin outside Santa Fe who invited us out every year. Nothing fancy. Small house, gravel drive, big dry sky. "Come whenever you want," the cousin would say at Christmas. "You two need a change of scenery." Ellen wanted to go, not forever, just to be somewhere our routines did not already know our names. Every year I found a reason not to. One spring it was money. Another year it was inventory season. Another year the car needed brakes. Another year my supervisor hinted he might retire soon, and I told myself I needed to stay visible. The reasons changed clothes, but they served the same master. I did not want to step outside the little circle of what I could predict. Unknown places did not excite me anymore. They accused me. Then one July, Ellen booked the trip without asking first. She set the printed confirmation beside my coffee cup before work. Departure in 3 weeks, 5 days. She had already arranged for the neighbor's son to mow the lawn and for her sister to check the mail. I remember standing there in the pale kitchen light, staring at that paper as if it had insulted me. When she came in, she was braced for a fight, but she also looked hopeful in a way I had not seen for a long time. That hopeful look did something ugly to me. It made me feel responsible for either protecting it or crushing it. And because fear always calls destruction the safer option, I chose to crush it. I asked why she would spend money without talking to me. I said 5 days was irresponsible. I said my boss was counting on me. I said travel was exhausting and overpriced and mostly disappointing anyway. The more I talked, the less believable I sounded, even to myself. Ellen listened. Then she folded the confirmation in half and said, "I knew you'd do this." Those words were not angry. They were tired. Tired in the way wood gets tired after holding weight for too many years. We did not go. She called her cousin and made some light excuse about work. I heard her laugh politely on the phone. When she hung up, She went out and sat on the back steps for a long time. I watched her through the screen door and did nothing. That memory returns to me more than the larger tragedies. Not because Santa Fe would have fixed our lives. It was 5 days. But it was a crossroads disguised as a vacation, a chance to prove that routine did not own us completely, a chance to let wonder back into a house that had grown allergic to surprise. I told myself I was preserving stability. What I was preserving was the cage. Years later, after Ellen was gone, I found one of those Santa Fe brochures tucked inside a cookbook. Blue sky, red rock. A little handwritten note in the margin. Maybe next year. There was no next year. That is one of the cruelest things about confusing comfort with happiness. By the time you understand the difference, time has already begun collecting interest on your cowardice. If you had asked me then whether I loved my wife, I would have said yes without hesitation, and I would have been telling the truth. But love without courage turns thin over time. It stays recognizable, but it loses strength where it matters most. After the trip incident, life resumed the way life always does when people are practiced at carrying disappointment. We went to work. We paid bills. We replaced a failing water heater. We attended funerals and backyard birthdays. From the outside, we looked fine. And I know that because people said so. You two have a good, steady life, neighbors told us, and I accepted it as praise. Steady can become a disguise. There is a version of marriage that survives by reducing itself to logistics. Who's picking up bread? What time is the dentist appointment? Did you call the plumber? There can still be affection in those exchanges. But there can also be evasion. A relationship can become so efficient that nobody notices it has stopped being fully alive. That was happening to us, and because nothing exploded, I treated the silence as proof that everything still worked. One night, Ellen stood at the bathroom sink, taking off her earrings after supper, and asked, almost casually, "If you could do one thing differently, what would it be?" I remember the yellow vanity light. I remember the cicadas outside. I remember how ordinary the moment looked, which is why I answered lazily. I said, "Probably save more money." She looked at me through the mirror and said, "That's not what I meant." I knew it wasn't, but I also knew what kind of answer she was asking for. And I had spent years sedating those answers before they could reach daylight. So I made a joke and took out the trash. That was my pattern. Not cruelty exactly. Evasion. People imagine lives are ruined by grand betrayals. Sometimes they are damaged by 1,000 evasions so small they leave no single bruise. I did not gamble away our future. I did not disappear with another woman. I simply kept choosing the easier emotional move in every crucial moment. Over time, that kind of cowardice leaves marks just as permanent as scandal. Ellen became quieter. Not bitter, not dramatic, just less expectant. That was worse. Hope leaves a room in stages. First, it stops knocking loudly. Then it speaks less. Then one day, you realize it has learned not to ask. The shameful truth is that part of me felt relieved when she stopped pressing. Relief again. The same false comfort I had been worshiping for years. If she no longer asked for more, then I no longer had to face how little I was willing to risk. I see now that happiness would have required participation. It would have required honesty, discomfort, vulnerability, movement, maybe even failure. Comfort required only maintenance. And I was a gifted maintenance man. I could keep a hollow life running smoothly for years. What I could not do was admit the machine was costing us something sacred. By the time our son moved out, the house had grown too quiet to hide behind. He left for a job in Tennessee with more confidence than I had ever allowed myself. I helped load boxes into a rented trailer on a bright May morning. The driveway smelled like diesel and fresh-cut grass. Ellen handed him sandwiches wrapped in foil. He hugged us both, promised to call on Sundays, and pulled away, smiling, toward a life not yet arranged. I felt proud. Underneath the pride, though, something meaner stirred. Not jealousy exactly, recognition. He was leaving at the age when I had first started teaching myself to stay. For a while, the house seemed stunned by his absence. One less toothbrush in the bathroom, one bedroom too clean for too long, one less plate in the rack. I would pass his room at night and think about how easily a home can become a museum. Ellen began spending more time at the community garden across town. Tomatoes, basil, marigolds, green beans. She came home dirt-smudged and sun-tired and somehow lighter than I had seen her in years. She talked about the retired teacher with the bad knees, the widower who brought extra seedlings, the night shift nurse who gardened at dawn, because she said it was the only thing that made her mind go quiet. One evening, Ellen asked if I wanted to come see it. I said, maybe next week. There is almost no sentence I use more destructively than that one. Maybe next week. It sounds reasonable, flexible, soft. In my life, it meant no, but with enough politeness to delay consequences. Maybe next week was the slogan of my self-betrayal. Weeks passed, then months. I never went. That fall, Ellen got sick. Not dramatic at first. Just fatigue that would not lift, then tests, then waiting rooms with beige walls and magazines nobody touched. I will not turn this into a speech about suffering. The world already has enough of those. I will say this. Illness clarifies time in a way nothing else can. Sitting beside her during treatments, I was haunted not by spectacular mistakes, but by ordinary invitations I had declined. A trip, a garden, a conversation, a chance to answer honestly, a chance to go while going was still easy. When she grew strong enough for short walks, we moved slowly around the block in the evenings. Once, near the maple at the corner, she stopped to catch her breath and said, "You always thought keeping things the same would keep them safe." I asked what she meant, though I knew. She looked ahead and said, "Nothing stays safe by standing still." There was no defense left that did not sound pathetic. In that moment, I finally saw the shape of my life from above. Not my reasons, my pattern. I had not been preserving happiness. I had been preserving familiarity, even when familiarity was draining the life out of the people I loved. The worst part was understanding I had trained myself so thoroughly that numbness could feel like peace. That is what comfort can do when you bow to it long enough. It lowers your standards until the absence of pain begins to feel like joy. After Ellen died, the house became honest. Grief has no interest in helping a man maintain appearances. It strips varnish from every lie he has leaned on. The kitchen was still the kitchen. The chair by the front window was still the chair by the front window. Her robe still hung on the bathroom hook for a while because I could not make myself move it. Yet nothing in that house would cooperate with my old story anymore. I could no longer call our life happy simply because it had been orderly. Order looks very different with one plate on the table. In that first year alone, I opened drawers for no reason. I walked into rooms and forgot what I had meant to do there. I found her grocery lists, her clipped recipes, little penciled notes in church bulletins. Life leaves paper trails when it is lived with care. Those scraps hurt me more than the official things. Not the death certificate, not the sympathy cards, the note that said peaches, onions, stamps, evidence of plans that assumed tomorrow, evidence of a woman who had continued participating in life, even while I kept shrinking from it. I also found proof of the life I had not allowed us to live. Travel brochures, a printout for a train route through Colorado, a flyer from the community college for a small business night course I had once mentioned and then dismissed. Ellen had saved them all. Not, I think, as accusations, more like witness statements, proof that possibility had existed in our house. That was harder to bear than hardship. Hardship lets you blame fate. Squander makes you answer for yourself. So I began, very late, to do small brave things. I do not say that to sound noble. Regret teaches scale if it teaches anything at all. Courage is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply refusing to lie in your own mouth. I drove west alone one October and kept driving past the point where I usually would have turned back. I signed up for a weekend repair course with men half my age and did not pretend I was above it. I sold things I had stored out of habit rather than love. I sat on a bench in Santa Fe with Ellen's old brochure folded in my jacket and let the desert light hit my face like a verdict. None of that returned my life to me. That is not how time works. But every act exposed the same truth from a different angle. Happiness is not the prize you receive for avoiding risk. It becomes possible only after you stop worshiping comfort. Comfort can be useful. A warm chair on a cold night, soup in winter, a familiar road home. But once you start treating comfort as your highest good, it begins collecting pieces of you in exchange. First, your curiosity, then your honesty, then your willingness to be changed. I used to think my great mistake was never chasing something big enough. Now I know the deeper mistake was smaller and more humiliating than that. I kept choosing whatever allowed me to remain emotionally undisturbed. That choice looked harmless in single moments. Over decades, it shaped my whole life. If I could start again, I would not ask for more money, better luck, or an easier road. I would ask for a higher tolerance for discomfort. I would ask for the kind of courage that lets a man disturb his own routines before life does it for him. I would leave sooner when leaving was needed. I would answer honestly when honest answers threatened the tidy arrangement of things. For years, I thought happiness was supposed to feel calm. That was my misunderstanding. Calm can be part of happiness, but it is not the whole thing. Happiness has motion in it. Risk, participation, attention. It asks for your full weight, not just your management skills. Comfort asks much less. That's why it seduces so easily. It lets you feel decent while asking you to become smaller. These days, I sit on the back steps in the evening and listen to the neighborhood settle. A dog barks 2 streets over. Somebody slams a truck door. A television glows blue behind a curtain across the way. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life. I still like my chair. I still like familiar roads and the way the house knows my footsteps. But I no longer kneel to those things. Comfort is a place to rest. It is not a place to live forever. When I think of Ellen now, I remember her standing in the garage doorway with those old shop sketches in her hand, asking, "Do you still want that?" I remember the trip brochure beside my coffee cup. I remember her saying, "Nothing stays safe by standing still." She spent years trying to hand me back my own life, and I kept calling that threat when it was really invitation. There is a particular sadness in realizing you were loved by someone who could already see the person you might have become. I had that kind of love in my house and mistook it for pressure. I had the chance to enlarge my life and kept choosing the smaller room because it felt easier to heat. That is the shame of it. Not that I suffered too much, that I accepted too little. So if an old man gets one useful sentence before the dark, maybe it is this: comfort and happiness are not the same home. Comfort will let you sit still while your life quietly hardens around you. Happiness asks you to enter it fully with your uncertainty, honesty, appetite, and nerve. One keeps you insulated. The other keeps you alive. I learned the difference late. Too late to fix everything, not too late to tell the truth. The life I defended so carefully was never the life I most deeply wanted. I confused what felt familiar with what was good. I confused what was manageable with what was meaningful. I confused comfort with happiness. And by the time I understood the gap between them, years had already gone by that no apology could recover. A comfortable life can still be a lonely one. A stable life can still be an unlived one. And the cost of avoiding discomfort is often paid in the exact currency you meant to save: your time, your spirit, and the people who waited for you to step fully into your own life.